So I'm looking at my original TX03 on the table here. The top's off because I had to determine whether I'd blown an ESC or a motor. So I wired the opposite motor to the same ESC, and sure enough the motor was fine, it was just the ESC. So I'm waiting on a spare part. Banggood have cancelled my order a couple of times, so they're not in stock, but hopefully I can get it from Alipay. Anyway, here's the second EX02 Mini that I bought. And as you can see, I've made a modification. I've taken out the original camera and put something else in with a whip antenna with a hole through the click on top, and that's working well. So here's the original camera that it came bundled with, which is quite a good camera, nice resolution, and you can actually tilt it up and down a little bit within the canopy, but the antenna was tucked away inside the body and it's got a very narrow field of view. So after a while I thought I'm better off with my favourite Eachine TX03 instead. So I've got one that I'd crashed and knocked off the cloverleaf antenna, so I replaced it with a whip antenna. So what I've done, I put it in. I'd already modified it to plug in the same way, same kind of plug as the EX2 Mini had, which is the same as the Bugs 3, it's the same sort of thing, so that was easy. And they made up a little holder from a card with a cutout where the LED is on the back, where you figure out the power and channels and whatever. And usually when I do this sort of thing I have to hold them in with cable ties. In this case it was a nice snug fit against the card with that cutout, and by the time I put the top on with the antenna going through the hole, the whole thing stayed together quite nicely without any restraint. So I was quite pleased with that. So wider field of view and a longer range, and it fits neatly into the space. So there's the top, just drilled a bit of a hole in it, some snug pit over the thick part of the antenna. And what I'm doing here is looking at software modifications. What I've done is I've modified, the main thing I've done is modified the throttle, so whenever you make a movement with the aerial on the elevator, that's roll of pitch on channels 1 and 2, it blips the throttle a little bit, and that has been very effective in stopping the tail dropping, which is a problem with this model, particularly if you've game enough to try acro with it. So this is probably pretty hard to see, but what I'm trying to demonstrate is I touch the controls on the right, in other words the aerial on the elevator, roll and pitch, you'll see a little bit of a blip on the value of the throttle. Not too much, and initially I had it much more aggressive and I was having trouble bringing the thing down, the throttling down far enough to stop. But this seems to work pretty well. So that's, so just looking at that to confirm what I'd done, and in a moment I'll flash up on screen the actual code that I wrote to mix the elevator and the aerial on in with the throttle settings. It's something I wasn't aware of until I came across it. I think it was John Bohm on the internet, on YouTube. He was doing this for tiny whoops, and I've got a tiny whoop done the same way with a brushed motor. He said anything with small underpowered motors is a good way to prevent throttle sag, and I've got to agree with him, it's worked really well. So here I am, I'm waggling the elevator for pitch to demonstrate what happens when I do it. I don't know how well it works, how well you can see it. I probably moved them a bit too quickly, and then back to moving the throttle on its own to see the throttle values change. So I was quite pleased discovering that I could do this. I've done a little bit of work with Betaflight, but I'm pretty happy with what I can do for a standard drone that doesn't have that, just with these settings. There it is up on the screen. And now at last we get the actual flight. So this is flying with these settings down the beach. I've got a 15-kilometre wind, so I'm taking off into the wind and being a bit cautious at first. And then later I get into it and really enjoy the flight. So this is recorded on my Aomway goggles. I notice it's a little bit jerky, but then I noticed the original AVI file is also a tad jerky, but it's certainly good to fly with. And the other thing with the TX03 camera, as opposed to the one that came with the EX2, is not only you've got the advantages of longer range, partly because the antenna is sticking out top, and I've got it set to 200 milliwatts and a wider field of view. But the other thing, I was getting a bit of breakup with the other one at critical times, though that's probably to do with, well, it's to do with the power, I think. But hey, successful mod, and I'm very happy with how it flies, and I'm more than happy that I'll go ahead and replace the ESC in the first one I bought, rather than my alternative, which was to rip the guts out of it and put an F4 stack in it. So I'll delay that major modification until I feel the need sometime later. So, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll sign out now and pop some music over the top. So, bye till next time. And by the way, I've got a cold, which is why my voice is a little bit croaky. But it was a wonderful flight, and it was great to get out in the ocean air rather than sitting at home feeling miserable. So here we go. Bye.